Well, I keep hearing and reading that Congressman Stephen King says this and says that, so I figured he's a friend of the program. Why don't I bring Congressman King here and he can tell us. Congressman King, how are you, sir?
Well, I'm going along all right, Mark. Thanks for having me on. It's been a little tense around this hill the last couple of days.
Oh, I can imagine, and you're calling us live from the House floor, right off the House floor. Is that correct?
I am. There's going to be a little chaos noise here in a little bit. I stepped out on the balcony to get away from the noise for a couple of minutes. They'll call another vote in a few minutes.
What exactly is going on in the Rules Committee that is chaired by David Dreyer in relation to the CR and Obamacare?
Well, what happened was I ran up to the Rules Committee last night. It was the last stop on the trail of trying to get the amendment to unfund the automatic appropriations in Obamacare, the language that was written into the bill that automatically spends money essentially in perpetuity. I wanted to be able to offer my amendment that says no funds in this continuing resolution and no funds in any other previously passed, no funds heretofore appropriated, shall be used to implement or enforce Obamacare. That should have been an Appropriations Committee meeting that would have allowed me to have an amendment offered there. It would have passed. My amendment otherwise should have been written into the bill. They didn't do that. Leadership elected not to ask that be done. And so then I had to go to the Rules Committee and ask them to exempt my amendment from a point of order, which is...
All right, let me slow you down. So at the first level, the Appropriations Committee, who's chairman of the Appropriations Committee?
Hal Rogers of Kentucky.
So Hal Rogers of Kentucky, obviously getting word from up on high, chose to make sure that your amendment, which would have explicitly defunded Obamacare as part of the CR, would not be part of the proposed bill. Is that correct?
Well, I would say that if I actually think he's on my side on this, but what it amounts to is that in the drafting of the bill, those who put their heads together, he among them, collectively decided that my language would not be in it.
Well, my question is, when they put their heads together and put this bill together, does the Speaker of the House get to look at it?
If he seeks to do so, the answer would be yes, I'm very confident. And he would have his staff looking at it and probably taking advice from the staff because things move too fast around here for much more focus than that from the Speaker.
How about the Majority Leader, Cantor? Would he have looked at it?
He or his staff, I would say, certainly would be in on that discussion. Mm-hmm.
I mean, the fact is, as a practical matter, they're not going to put a major bill on the floor unless they're well briefed on what's in that bill, correct?
I would think that at least their staff would have scoured it and they would have believed that it was consistent with the theme that they wanted to bring to the floor. Yes, it would have been a staff and leadership scoured bill before it would have been offered. And so what it amounts to is where we're going is I think that I'm convinced that there was a decision made not to include my language for reasons that we can only speculate but probably can't know.
Well, wait, I want to take this one step at a time. So the Appropriations Committee never considered your amendment. Is that correct?
Well, they didn't have a markup in appropriations. The Appropriations Committee just simply gathered information from their Republican side to make recommendations on cuts and then wrote the bill. But there never was a committee hearing.
All right, but you asked them to include your language and they didn't.
All right. That's correct.
So then you go to the next level, the Rules Committee. Who's the chairman of the Rules Committee?
David Dreyer of California.
David Dreyer. And you go to the Rules Committee and you say, look, this may not be the normal process, but I need an exception because you didn't really go through the normal Appropriations Committee process, and I want to have my amendment on this bill that would defund in the continuing resolution the expenditure for money for Obamacare that Pelosi stuck in the original appropriations bill, correct?
That is correct, Mark.
And what happened there?
Well, I made my argument before the Rules Committee last night, and I made all the cogent arguments that I had accumulated over a couple of weeks, which can be considerable. And the Rules Committee was respectful and polite, and they at one point expressed that they wished I hadn't put them in this uncomfortable position. I don't think they understood the position I was in if they thought theirs was uncomfortable. But in any case, they each politely down the line of the 8 Republicans expressed their reservations about approving my amendment to go to the floor because they appear to be wedded to the fidelity towards the rule, which no one else could understand. as opposed to fidelity to the oath to the Constitution, since Obamacare has twice been found unconstitutional.
8 Republicans, you said, on this committee?
Yes.
Did any of them vote for it?
Well, what happened was I didn't. There was not a recorded vote. It just simply was. They went back into a room after the hearing and discussed the plan, and then came out forward and voted a rule out that did not include my language. So essentially, I made my case and was not afforded a vote by the Rules Committee.
No, they didn't want to be recorded as voting one way or the other, did they?
I would say that would have been the reason, yes. And I thought about pushing for a recorded vote, and I also decided that I need to keep the avenue of dialogue open. It's a pretty touchy situation here. But that was I don't know that they would have had a recorded vote, but I declined to press that issue because I knew that they didn't want that pressure on them.
Congressman King of Iowa, can you hold on? We have a hard break, please.
That'll work good. I'll vote, and I'll be ready to go right after.
All right, when in doubt, vote no. All right, don't hang up. We'll be right back with Congressman Steve King of Iowa. It's a delight to have Congressman King from Iowa with us. Now, Congressman King, before we get back into this, it's tough to take on the power structure, isn't it? Even in your own party. I mean, it's got to be uncomfortable.
Well, I mean, it is. There's always a circling of the wagons at the top, and when they decide to take a course, they may not have considered all the alternatives, but they do consider they want to stay on the course they've charted. So it's often seen as a challenge to leadership rather than an effort to try to produce the best public policy possible. And I just think that it's endemic in every legislature that I've served in, but I don't agree with it. I think you have to do the right thing, and maybe you learn that right thing at the last minute, but you must be willing to shift and do the right thing.
Well, here is the thing. The American people are more engaged than ever before, certainly more in my lifetime, and they're well aware of Obamacare. They're well aware of what this president's doing with his spending. They're well aware that Pelosi put a bunch of mines in this minefield that is Obamacare and the spending bills, and they want it fixed. So the Republican leadership is either going to be part of the problem or they're going to be part of the reform movement, regardless of what the Senate and the president does. And I don't know. I know how you live your life. I live it the same way. You do the right thing, and you hope it turns out well, because you only live once. And when you're on your deathbed, right, Congressman, you just want to know you did what you could.
That's very well said. I don't think I've ever said it that well, but I know that it's an extraordinary privilege to serve here in Congress. I could live 10,000 lifetimes knowing what I know now, and I could not willfully follow this same path. So I have a high duty to use all of the resources that have been given to me and do it for the right thing, for the reasons that you said. And,
so now we have a rule. A rule which is basically the fiat that comes out of the committee on how this is going to be handled on the floor of the House, correct?
Yes, that's it. They write the rule for every debate, but all debate for each bill that comes to the floor. They can write what they want to write, and that's why you have the Rules Committee to direct that debate on the floor and try to produce the result that they want. Is the other part of it.
Can this be amended on the floor of the House, independent of what the Rules Committee has done, or no?
Well, my problem all along is the answer is yes, and I have about 6 or 7 amendments that I have filed, but this one has to go outside the definition of the appropriations bill, of the continuing resolution, and go to Obamacare itself. The only way to shut that funding off is to address directly Obamacare. That's not within the purview of the bill, so it's subject to a point of order on the floor. I've known that all along. I've known that since last July. And they will tell me, well, then appeal the ruling of the chair. But that's a simple majority vote on the floor, and I could force that, but I'm very likely to lose. And it's hard for me, who has gone to the Rules Committee and said, I recognize I'm out of order on the floor, write me a rule because we must protect the Constitution. And so it's hard for me to be duplicitous and make an argument on the floor that's contrary to the one that I made in the rules, plus I believe the one that I made in the rules.
So we have the spectacle, then, of a Republican-controlled House of Representatives possibly voting for a continuing resolution that funds a law that has been voided by a federal judge.
Well, I think I should just say, no, I'm not quite technically that, because the funding that I'm trying to shut off is automatic funding in Obamacare, and it's not the direct subject of the appropriations bill itself. So What we'd be doing instead is perhaps voting a continuing resolution that has been clearly been defined to have been blocked from, including within it the language that automatically funds. And there's a little bit of a distinction there. It isn't actually voting for the funding, but it's the rules have blocked us from having the opportunity. So what it really boils down to in the end is, does leadership want to concede that Nancy Pelosi was so clever in writing Obamacare that she was able to prevent her successor speaker from devising a means in the rules in order to unfund it? I have a hard time accepting that, and I would not if I were a person in
Well, here's the way I see it. If I'm a freshman, and I've never voted for Obamacare or anything close to it, or any spending bill that supports it, that if I vote for this continuing resolution with her little trick in it, that I am voting to fund Obamacare. I mean, I understand your point, but if I vote against the continuing resolution, then there is no more funding for Obamacare.
That if you vote against the continuing resolution, I think it goes back to the drawing board, and then my language is included. At that point, we could shut off the funding for Obamacare.
Here's what's going to happen, Congressman. I'm serious about this. The conservatives, at a minimum, and the Republicans, which are a broader universe there in the House, are going to have to figure out how they're going to deal with this constant threat to shut down the government. The president is constantly threatening this now. He's threatening to veto $60 billion in cuts in a 3.6 or whatever the hell it is, trillion-dollar budget. He's going to do this all along. As long as our guys seem like they're prepared to duck or they're prepared to bend, he's going to push them right to the wall.
Mark, that's exactly right. And that's part of the arguments that I've made, is that this is the place to put up the fight. If there has to be a fight, whether it's in war or whether it's in politics, you choose the terrain on which to fight, and you want to fight when your army is at its maximum strength. Our army's right now at our maximum strength. We're one short from what we were a week ago. This is the terrain, and if we don't choose it now, we will be pushed into the corner, one finger of the bully in our chest at a time, one step backwards at a time, until there's no ground left on which to fight. And if Obama is going to intimidate our conference by threatening to veto, and then as long as we're afraid of that, he will get what he's willing to fight for.
And as I was saying before you came on the air, sir, I said this really isn't a fight between Obama and the Republicans. It's a fight between Obama and the American people. We, the people, have made it clear in every survey and poll we can in the election in November, we don't want this Obamacare. We don't want this massive spending. It's not that he's defying the Republicans. He's defying us, the people. And that's the battle between us and him.
It is. He's defying the American people, and I've made this argument also for a long time, that the American people will stay with us as long as we believe in ourselves and as long as we make the arguments that are constitutional and fiscally responsible. When people look back at 1995 and they say that there was a government shutdown and the president won and the Congress lost because presidents win in shutdowns and the legislature loses, I think they're learning the wrong message. That, by the one data point, does not an axiom make, for one thing. This is a different time, a different era, a different subject, and it is a principle. The principle of Obamacare and out-of-control socialization of America and the theft of American liberty by a Congress that was ruled by a draconian speaker and hook and crook legislation by shenanigan that put this in place, and the shenanigans in the bill that continue to fund it. This is a principle the American people can stand with, and they want us to stand with them. I'm for. I would stare the president down, and I've told a lot of my colleagues, if you can't decide when you will blink, just wait for me.
Okay. And the thing is, people who voted for TARP, people who voted for the stimulus, many of them regret it now. People who voted and were talked into these other things, told they had to do it for political reasons or to save the country, turns out that was all fraudulent, and it wasn't true. And now, actually, voting against Obamacare in whatever form it takes, whatever legislative vehicle it takes, that is the way you save the country. That is the way you save the Treasury. And you know what? Sometimes taking the right vote is the politically right thing to do.